Okay, well, welcome everybody to maybe the first ever gathering of all the ex and present chair people of the IAPP Board of Directors. It's amazing to see you all here. This is part of a celebration that we've organized for the 20th anniversary of the IAPP, which is a really exciting thing that's happening this year. We have 57,000 members now. All of you on this call will remember when the organization was much smaller, but 57,000 members now, a lot of them hopefully watching this video after we have a chat together about various topics. We have more than 25,000 people certified across the credentials that the organization has built. The numbers are really, really very impressive, and I think, as we all know, IAPP has a big impact not only in the lives of the people on this call, but on the lives and professional experiences of the people that are going to watch the video. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as Trevor says, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're excited to have everybody on the call, and we're really interested and curious to hear your candid thoughts about some of the topics we're going to throw out. And there's no rules and nothing's off the table. Please be candid, and we are recording, so everybody should know that. And hopefully we can have some fun storytelling and maybe even some advice that could be interesting and useful for the people that are watching. So we're not going to introduce anybody. We'll pop people's names and titles on the video screen so people that are watching can find out who you all are. There may be a lot of LinkedIn invites afterwards, so be duly warned. Be duly warned. I'm sure many people would appreciate the opportunity to connect with some of the people on this call. So be on the lookout of how we can be helpful to others as well. So let's get started. Because I am this year's chairman, I get to ask some prompt questions that are going to help us get started. But I'm super excited for the first question that we want to ask, which is of Agnes. And Agnes, for those that don't know, is the first ever chairperson of the IAPP. And Agnes, I want to ask you how many books are behind you, but I also want to know, 20 years ago, can you just tell us a little bit about how it all started and
Sure. So 20 years ago plus, for me, it really began with Graham Leach Bliley. I was in the financial services area, and a lot of people at that time became privacy officers. And I heard of an organization called the Privacy Officers Association, and I thought, oh, I should probably join this and get to meet other people. Well, the Privacy Officer Association gathered, I remember, in a small conference room, probably in March of 2000. And there were a few other people there, several that were now very much involved with the IAPP. And we began talking about privacy, the governance issues, the situations that were going to be in requiring of compliance for Graham Leach Bliley in 2001. Also around that time, there was another sort of competing privacy organization, and I always have to look that one up because I was not a member, of the Association of Corporate Privacy Officers. You'll note that both of these organizations have the title privacy officers. After a while, after the meetings went from about 35 to maybe 75 people in total, fast forward till about 2002, there were a lot of discussions about bringing the two organizations together. Why should they compete with each other? Let's have one and grow it and create a board, create an organization that could govern it. And I was asked to become the chair of it. And I love saying that there have been so many changes, obviously, with the now IAPP, the growth, you talked about it, Justin, at the very beginning. But my number one happiness and my number one, I think, success was hiring Trevor. Chris, you'll remember those interviews, those conversations in the summer of 2002, where we interviewed for someone to lead the IAPP. We had a consulting organization that did a lot of the behind the scenes that really kind of led us. And we thought, we're now this larger organization, we need an executive director. So for me, the best hire ever after all of these years, I would have to say, was Trevor Hughes, who now leads the IAPP. That's my initial story.
Well done. Well, you deserve a lot of credit, I think, and we're certainly grateful for that foresight. I agree with Sandy there. So Chris, were you part of you were part of the original posse as well?
Indeed, yeah. I remember, as Agnes does, the early formation meetings in the March of whatever it was, 2000, long time ago. I remember it was a cold, rainy kind of winter evening, and we all met in some conference room. Sandy, I think you were there as well, and Harriet Pearson and a bunch of others. And, you know, here we are, plus 20 years later, you know, going strong and at levels I would have never imagined back then. And just to echo Agnes's comment, I do indeed, Agnes, remember you and I think Vince as well, interviewing candidates for the executive director position. And we could not have made a better choice than Trevor Hughes. I've always said that much of where and what the IAPP is today is in large part due to Trevor's leadership, his foresight, his entrepreneurship, his pushing us to be more, more aggressive and more proactive in everything that we do, which kind of leads me to, one of my fonder memories is my time as chair, and that was the introduction of the CIPP certification program, which I think was really a defining moment for the profession and for the IAPP. And those were still fairly early days for the IAPP. We were still in many ways getting our legs under us as an organization. And I remember when Trevor brought this up, and I thought, oh, geez, we're just getting a little bit of financial stability and sort of figuring things out, and maybe we should just go a little slower on this. And, always keeping his eye on the prize. I remember Trevor saying, if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? And I think he was absolutely right. It was the right move to do. So anyways, in the fall of 2004, in New Orleans, that's the conference that used to be referred to as the Academy, was the launch of the inaugural CIPP exam. And I remember that distinctly. New Orleans, of course, is a very memorable place to begin with. But anyways, proctoring the first exam was Richard Purcell. And Richard shows up in a full old-fashioned nun's outfit, head to toe, costume on with a yardstick in his hand, and just added a bit of levity to the whole event. And, many people taking that certification exam hadn't taken exams in a whole bunch of years, so there was some anxiety there for sure. But then I recall afterwards flying back from New Orleans and running into two people in the BWI airport who had taken the exam and thought that it was important that I understand all the things that were wrong with that exam. Double negative questions, poorly written questions, everything else that happens with a brand new certification exam. And then on the way home, I listened, which was about an hour drive for me from BWI airport to my home. I had numerous messages from other test takers who also felt it was important to share the feedback on that exam. So anyways, it has come a long way, baby, in terms of certification, and it was absolutely the right move at the time, for sure. And here we are today, as Justin, you mentioned, 25,000 plus CIPPs or variants of CIPPs around the globe. So a real testament to the profession and where this has come over the last 20 years.
Can I just take a quick straw poll from everybody? How many people on the call have ever been approached with someone complaining about the unfairness of an exam or a question? Or show hand? Anybody who has not? All right. So on behalf of the global community, we are grateful you've taken these exams. We are sorry it is torture. And over time, this exam has strengthened and gotten better. And even, there's quite a bit of science that goes into the testing of the exam now. For those of you who are very early adopters, we're grateful. And, but we see you and we hear you, and we thank you.
Justin, it's Boriana here. I will tell you my own story about my own exam. So when, of course, we became board members, we had to take exam because Trevor said, what kind of role model are you if you're not doing the exam? So I had to take it. And my first exam, I was too busy looking for gaps and saying, these are bad questions, these are bad answers, this could be answered both ways. And I was writing email as I was taking exam to Trevor saying, question is not right. By the way, it's multiple choice, but it should be another answer. So, I remember I almost flopped my exam because I was too busy looking at the questions and thinking, why are they asking this? They shouldn't be doing this. So anyway, but I did pass. I never know how good or bad, but I did just pass.
I think we all passed that first exam in 2004. We all took it at the same time, and I think we all passed.
Goodness. I was going to say,
I don't want to know any more about it.
Exam, Agnes, that's right. And we all came out and we all started jibber jabbering saying, we have to fix these questions.
So Sandy, you were part of that posse as well, that sort of initial thought leaders crew. And I wanted to turn to you because it's sort of shifting topics slightly, but it is related. For those, I don't want to reference age, but I want to reference experience. So many people have seen. Well, you called yourself a grandma, that you love being a grandma, and I know that a lot of people, particularly newer people in the profession, are really drawn to you for a lot of really great reasons. I mean, I think many rightly describe you as a pioneer in the profession, and particularly in terms of women's roles in executive functions in organizations. And I was hoping you would share with us some of your experience, both while you were in-house, but also subsequently in terms of mentorship, because so many people that get involved in the IAPP, I think, are very hungry for those opportunities to seek out people who have been successful and want to hear people's stories. And I'm wondering if that indeed is your experience. It's what I perceive, but I'd love to hear from you.
Well, yeah, and I thank you so much, Justin. And it's a role I love. And even though I've been rewired from Procter & Gamble for 8 years now, believe it or not, I'm still involved in privacy with being on some boards, but also for as an executive coach with some in the profession, because it's true to my heart. It's the right thing to do. We face it in everything that we, especially now, are going through. And during that time, okay, don't come to me for questions about that certification because we are grandfathered. So I can't do that. But at
you were grandmothered into the certification.
I was grandmothered into that and still keep that, but I haven't gone for any more because I'm a terrible test taker. But anyway, because it was the right thing to do and it was the common bar, we would help each other at different companies with their programs and just getting started in the privacy profession. And so even though I was at P&G, I was helping some of the people at Kimberly-Clark and others because that common thread of doing the right thing for personal information, we wanted to get it right across the whole spectrum of companies. I can remember Burger King came up and I was helping their fledgling privacy program. And of course, it was all free because I'm working for P&G, right? But they gave me some Whopper coupons, which I passed around to some of the staff that were working in privacy. And then, so that kind of, still trying to help where I can. And From a gender point of view, there were some of us who were early in the profession. We kind of banded together as the Executive Women in Privacy. It kind of, Rena Mears used to have these great dinners, you know, before that everybody, male and female, you know, would just clamor to do because they were always such top-notch things. And she was with a consulting firm, one of her consulting firms at the time. And when she retired or left that first firm and was on her own, we kind of banded together and said, you know, let's have a women's group. That kind of grew. And then we worked with the IAPP and then they started the Women in Privacy. And so we kind of handed that back off, but there was a lot of mentoring going on in that, especially for women to bring them in and grow the profession. And I can remember one of the crowning achievements after I had rewired from P&G, came back for the celebration of the survey that IAPP does every year, showed that there were 50% women. So the fact that we had hit that bar of 50-50 and you know, the salaries were pretty much like in line. It's like, wow, what profession can really claim this? You know, where women have an equal set, you know, seat at the table there. So I was really proud of that moment.
Absolutely.
Justin, if I can jump in on the point that Sandy just made regarding the 50-50, I was on the board at the time that that particular survey result came out, and I remember how excited Trevor and everyone was about this actually could be an indicator, if you will, for how the broader tech community could think about what it takes for there to be a better male-female balance or gender balance within the tech community at large. And we had done a number of discussions out with the media that actually has led even to now. I still have people come back and ask questions about what is it about privacy? What is it about the profession that actually has enabled that gender parity to be struck? And what can other professions as well as the industries at large learn from that? So I just think that was a really milestone moment for the IAPP and for the community at large.
Yeah, and Justin, I wanted to add, going back to the mentorship, I am a product of being mentored by Sandy Hughes. And it was more important to me in my career than just about anything that I can think of. And even today, as I think about the pillars of my program, they root back to Sandy. When I came into IAPP, we're at 5 years, so 15 years. And the first week that I took over at that time at HP, we had a major privacy incident, a very visible one. It was around pretext. And that week, I got 2 phone calls. And they were both from mentors that proved to be invaluable to me in my career. One was Sandy, and just offering to help me through that process. The other was Trevor Hughes, really helping to give me a bit of cover as we worked through the incident. So I'll tell you, Sandy has probably been more influential to me in my career than any other person. I love her dearly. And still today, the concept she came up with that she put in place at P&G in the early years still proved to be correct. I think that so much of what she did really created the foundation that many of us have benefited from. So Sandy, thank you for that.
Thank you, Scott. And Justin, don't shine. I have this red face right now, so I feel really embarrassed.
I was going to say, congratulations, Sandy. That's amazing. It's awesome. You should feel great about it. You know, another really influential person and someone who's been a mentor to me is Joanne Stonier, who is on the call. I don't want to make you blush or anything like that, but
you are.
But I was very lucky because my first couple of years on the board overlapped with yours, and we got to I got to observe a lot of the sort of the leadership style that you brought, but also I really learned a lot about networking, and that's something that is so important for all of the members of the organization. And I think a lot of networking in the IAPP does happen around physical conferences, certainly in the past, but also in other venues and regulatory environments. And I would just love to hear from you, given the experience you've had and the successes you've had, you know, what kind of advice do you have for for the members that want to follow in your footsteps?
Well,
And
first of all, my mentors I'm looking at them as well. So I'm looking at Sandy, and I'm looking at Scott, and I'm looking at Brendan, and I'm looking at Hillary, and I'm looking at Boyana. And all of those folks predated me on the board, and all of them were mentors to me. So I learned from, I don't know, giants, in my opinion, as well. So, and Trevor, of course. When I was approached to be on the board, I already knew so many of these amazing people because of the networking of the IAPP. So I met Sandy through the Executive Women's Group. Boyana and I had the good fortune of meeting through the Center for Information Policy Leadership, which she leads now, but we were both members back then. And so the IAPP has always been a real cornerstone of networking, right? I mean, one of the benefits of going to Summit, and it's unfortunate this year we couldn't have it, Summit has been a gathering spot, but so has been the Congress, right? Different events that we've had all around the globe have really enabled a privacy community to emerge, right? So that's the first thing that I want to say. And then even when I was on the board, Justin, you know this, and Peter, you know this, and Hillary, I think you were part of this as post chair. We started these crazy pub crawls to try to get to all the affinity groups, right? I hate to admit it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of drinking too, but in order to really get out and meet the membership, because the membership started growing. I mean, Agnes, I love the early day stories because there was only about 500 of us at Summit or less, right? So we could see each other. When we were in breakout rooms, there was, 30 people, not, these huge breakout rooms that we have now. But, I've had the good fortune of also having mentors that have dragged me along with them into really interesting conversations. And Boyana, you're one of them. Jennifer Barrett Glasgow is another one who would drag me across the globe to different meetings where they thought my voice could be helpful. And so what I would say to our members is make friends, but make friends, professional friends, and have conversations not just about what you are personally experiencing, but what you're professionally experiencing. I mean, along with Peter and Hillary, we had the experience of the GDPR, right? So Hillary was the chair in 2016, 2017, 2018, and we had to help the membership really figure out how do you implement this darn thing, right? When we finally got the final wording of the regulation, how do you do it? How do you then really be up on its feet? There's so many ways that we are subject matter experts, and I think that's one of the reasons that women and men do really well in this profession is that it requires translating law to technology to business. And so we wind up needing to be great translators. And what has happened for me, I've just had the good fortune that organizations like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and the OECD has needed translators at this time to translate what does all of this mean for the globe. And so, but it means that you have to be willing to listen as well. And that is also what the IAPP has taught me, right? We have watched from the earliest days, Agnes, right, of the profession. And when I think of GLIBA, right, and what we were struggling with back then and trying to undo that, understand that language, to the language all the way today of CCPA and the Brazil law, right? We still are using some of the same skills, but how we apply them is different. And the world has gotten extraordinarily complex. And then you throw in things like COVID, right? And the balancing act that all of us are asked to do. And I just think that networking is the only way that we can continue to evolve into the new world of data use, right? And privacy and security and all the things that all of us have balanced throughout our careers. So I've just been fortunate to have known all of you because all of you have made me just incredibly smart. So my advice is get to know your peers, get to know them personally and professionally, and it just all happens.
Great, thank you for that. So you said a lot of really interesting things. They were like bonbons on a table, but I'll choose one of them, which was your emphasis on the idea of who we are, that we are subject matter experts. And it seems to me that at the IAPP, and this is true across the world, that there's always been this question or this tension about, is this an organization of lawyers? Is it about being a lawyer? versus a non-lawyer. And I wanted maybe to ask Jonathan, what your perspective is on that. I mean, you're a very educated, prestigious lawyer who's definitely embodies in my mind that sort of cadre that was at the heart and core of an important timeline in the IAPP's development. And I just love to hear your thoughts, whether this is still a lawyer's profession. Is it something more than that? What do you think? And has it changed over time?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Justin. That has been a perennial question for the organization and also within the departments that we've all been in. What role do lawyers have and what role do non-lawyers have? I think one of the things that's challenging as a lawyer entering the profession is that as lawyers, we're accustomed to giving advice, but not implementing it. So we deliver advice to people and they implement it. But being in the privacy profession, being a chief privacy officer, that requires a different set of skills, a new set of skills. In addition to having to understand the law and at times interpret the law, it also requires building the processes and procedures and structures that enable implementation of the law. And I think that can be a stretch. It was a stretch for me. I've been in both the position of being a lawyer within a corporate legal department and being chief privacy officer, and also being a lawyer, but not functioning as a lawyer within an ethics and compliance department for two very large companies in both cases. And I think the profession has matured about being more deliberate about the processes and the procedures, and not just the legal advice. And I think the IAPP has done a very good job in its programming also of addressing both of those things, of making sure that our programming covers what is the law, what does it say, what do you have to do, but then also how do you implement it? So conference sessions and the publications and various other things I think have served that need well, both for the lawyers and for the non-lawyers.
Jonathan, you're really right about the evolution of that. I remember people were perhaps an attorney, but also a chief privacy officer. Now you're finding that also, but you're also finding a lot of people in the legal department with privacy responsibilities. I think there's been a real growth and an expansion of the different roles people play that manage privacy.
And I think also it takes those different roles to manage it well. I've had people on my team who are formerly bank auditors, IT auditors at banks, and that is a great addition to any privacy department because they have a set of skills that lawyers just don't have unless they did that in a prior life. So it takes a village to operate a privacy department, and it can't be comprised just of lawyers.
I don't know if you all remember. I don't know if you all remember. Trevor used to have that slide where he would show the brain of a chief privacy officer of DPO, which was, the brain which consisted of many different aspects and skills. And of course, there were legal skills, there were leadership skills, there were marketing skills, there was, kind of follow me skill, jump off the cliff, but also technology skills, auditing skills. Joanna, I will never forget when we were in Hong Kong, we were talking to that audience of Hong Kong privacy officers, and they said to you, the chief privacy officer need to be, and you said they need to be a storyteller. They need to tell a story to get people behind them, right? And I think it is totally true. We need to resurrect that slide with that multi-functional brain. And then when I was presenting, I used to say, no wonder there's so many women like that, chief privacy officer, because only women's brain can have so many different aspects. But I'm not going to say that now, okay? So everybody can be a chief privacy officer.
Oh, well, on that note, not a lot of people realize that the brain example that Trevor took was actually Brendan Lynch. So that was his brain, and Brendan sort of emerged as the poster child for this more mature privacy governance program manager, village leader, chief. And Brendan, you've had and continue to have a really important career as a leader of many people and many processes in rather mature privacy organizations, even for technology companies that have a reputation of being less mature than other sectors. what's your take on this whole lawyer and non-lawyer trajectory for the IAPP and how it's matured over time?
Yeah, it's great. It's certainly, when I think about my career, I got into the profession over 20 years ago now through business consulting, then went into various tech companies. And I've benefited from many of the folks on this call from a mentoring perspective. As a non-lawyer, you know, I've received a lot of mentoring from lawyers, and that's been really helpful to balance that out. But I do think that's one of the amazing things of this privacy community and the IAPP as the organization that supports it. Yes, legislation, regulation plays a big role in what we all do, but we're seeing many enlightened organizations now also, they're going after bigger goals than that, right? People are going after goals of building trust. They're going after goals of enabling responsible data use, but in a more robust way, and privacy playing a much more supporting role for that. And managing risk to people, you know, managing risk to individuals as well as managing risk to companies. And if you do a good job against all those objectives, arguably the regulatory compliance almost comes along for free because you've put in place a comprehensive program. But the other aspect of it that I find, you know, fascinating today is the number of types of professions coming into the privacy world. The amount of privacy engineers, you know, there's privacy operations is a much growing field, particularly in the larger organizations. And so that's something that I think it's been impressive to see the IAPP cater to that right from the beginning. You know, I was involved in that first certification committee. I was, when people are raising their hands about, you know, exam questions, I was thinking, gosh, I remember in the first CIPP, there was actually a web privacy section. And I had the pleasure of writing some of those questions. And I even there were case studies there where I'd, you know, you had these various roles of somebody did this and somebody did that, and what do you think? And I used my parents' names in that. That lasted a few years before the more professional testing people came along and for some reason removed my parents' names from the text. Sure. But generally speaking, yeah, I think there's a wide range of opportunity for many people of many backgrounds to really have an important role in privacy going forward.
I think you make an important point, Brendan, and that is that I think the profession over this 20 years has really moved from focusing on the can we to the should we.
Right.
We've moved from is it legal to is it consistent with the values of the organization of which we're a part, and we've been required to be observers of the broader sort of privacy environment and bring it back to our organization to interpret and apply it, and it definitely transcends merely the law.
It does, yeah, and I think what we're seeing is an outgrowth of data ethics, essentially as an outgrowth of privacy in many ways in many companies as well.
My undergraduate degree was in philosophy, so what I aspire to be is a privacy philosopher, and I don't think that job title has been defined yet, but as soon as it is, I'm there.
Well, it's a nice jump to Hillary, because Hillary, you and I were talking about your experience and your focus on not just ethics and policy in technology, but the role that technology has played and continues to play for our members in helping them execute against some of the expectations of a more mature, modern privacy program. Can you talk about some of your thinking and your journey from the roles that you've had into something that's very technology tools, and also the importance of vendors, you know, in the IAPP community? There's been a proliferation of tools and solutions that are becoming indispensable for privacy practitioners to rely upon to achieve expectations of GDPR and other more mature programs. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you, Justin. Well, it's been so fascinating to listen to everyone talk about the history and evolution of our profession. and IAPP being at the center of enabling us to all grow as leaders within the organizations that we have been part of, and transitioning, if you will, from, in some cases, serving in a legal role to one that's more operational. And I'll just go back a bit to my own journey. I started out doing privacy actually as a marketer, and then as I was in law school at the time, and then as a non-lawyer still studying to get her law degree at night, and then ultimately then as a lawyer for I think about 6 years or so, and then transitioned over to the compliance part of the organization that I was part of, where our goal was to move beyond, as John was saying earlier, the giving of legal advice and hoping people followed it and throwing some auditors out to check whether they did, to looking much more operationally as to how do we get these things done? How do you really mobilize the organization to have accountability and responsibility for embedding privacy into what they do every day? And what's been so interesting to me in working with all of you over the years and with those at the IAPP over the years, just how much this continues to evolve and how much GDPR has really forced a lot of organizations who hadn't yet gotten there, and maybe we're really only looking at privacy at a cursory level, to look at how do we make this part of the fabric of what we do. Because in many respects, that accountability principle they added in there, you now have to. At least for those organizations who are moving past the bare surface level of compliance. So it's been interesting. As most of you know, in 2016, Scott and I have been talking a lot about technology. I think, Scott, the first time I heard you present about the technology approach to privacy was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 2009, 2010 timeframe. You were back like the early innovator, thinking about the fact that you can't do this stuff well across your whole organization if you're trying to rely on email and email. It just doesn't get you there. And I still remember the tool that you had built in-house at HP, demonstrating that. And I was talking to folks at the time about how to use an basically a documentum type repository to manage a lot of what we were trying to do with respect to annual safe harbor compliance verification, and it just didn't quite cut it. So fast forward to 2016, I remember we were talking about technology in the profession and what could be, and we had tried a bunch of different ways, many of us, to implement technology within our own organizations. And I had been talking to Trevor about that year's board retreat. And we were approaching a lot of different topics. And one of the topics that we had agreed upon was, how do you get privacy to scale? And this was in anticipation of GDPR and all the obligations organizations had around not just the compliance as a general matter in terms of the principles, really getting in and like, how do you show you're an accountable organization, whether you're a controller or a processor? How do you implement all these things, especially in light of all the fines that people are concerned about? And that's when, in my view, we really needed to have a conversation as an IAPP community, starting with the board and the staff, about technology. And I still remember that day, and we went around the room. There are a lot of different ideas. We had a fire starter conversation, and I walked out of there, and I'm like, you know what? I need to be part of this and making it happen. So it's been really an interesting journey for me over the last 4 years, trying to design technology solutions among many, many others. I think at the time there were probably like 10 vendors, 10 privacy tech vendors in the space. And now I think of last count that Trevor shared with me, we're over 300, and it's growing day in and day out, because there's a huge need for those of us who manage privacy within our organizations to actually be able to discover what data we have, how it's being used, where it's moving, and then how to embed it into what everybody's doing every day. And we know the rest of our businesses are becoming digitized, data-driven, and without technology to actually support that, it becomes really, really challenging. So I think it's been interesting 4 years later to reflect back on how much has happened. But really, I think in the absence of a law like GDPR, it probably wouldn't have happened quite at the pace that it has. I think GDPR was a huge driver. CCPA is becoming a bigger driver for those organizations who weren't subject to GDPR. And I think where it goes, we can only guess, but it's an exciting ride, as the entire time being a privacy professional has been for so many of us.
Thanks for that, Hillary. Peter, So GDPR hit, just like COVID hit while I am chairman. GDPR hit while you were chairman, if I'm not mistaken. So
It did.
do you think it had any impact on the organization at all? Size?
Well, I think about it a little bit differently. Go back, 15 years ago, and we had an IAPP Congress in Toronto, and they got David Lucadelis and Jennifer Stoddart and Trevor and some folding chairs up onto a small stage, and we all got hockey jerseys, and that was our big international presence. That was our huge international moment. We all had to take our passports to go to Toronto. And if you recall, at the time, the European community was coming to IAPP conferences and to commissioners' conferences, and it was a US versus Europe. Americans don't understand privacy, Europeans don't understand Americans. And Trevor had this view at the time that he was pushing very hard with all of us, I think, that there was no reason that the IAPP had to be viewed as an American organization. And there was no way that we had to be viewed as the GLBA organization or the Federal Privacy Act organization. And you fast forward to the time we've all been involved with now with GDPR and the IAPP. I went to Munich. Gosh, the thought of traveling is wonderful. But I went to Munich for the conference there, sold out pre-event, huge event running in 2 languages, even Paris now running as a major conference and really considered to be a standard bearer. As many of you said, the world of accountability is not just the world of GDPR. It set the framework for what a lot of us do. Frankly, it goes back to a lot of what Scott, and Sandy, and Brendan, and others have been doing for many years and teaching all of us for many years. But this is now the international standard. And for Trevor to have thought 10 years in advance that this was where the profession was going and that this was where the IAPP was going is so forward-looking. And I think it's played a really big part in getting us where we are. So to answer your question, Justin, it's a very long way of answering your question, but I don't think GDPR did this to the IAPP. I think Trevor saw it coming, and I think he got out ahead of it. But before I pass, I want to go back to a discussion that Joanne was having about networking, and I'll tell a very brief story. I remember back when the conference was at Woodley Park, and the big events there were the networking, particularly the Microsoft party and the suite off to the side in the old tower. And one year, my beloved Joe Oliveff and I went up to the conference, and we didn't buy passes. And we sat at the table in the coffee shop that was closest to the entrance to the conference, and we were meeting with people, and we were getting a tremendous amount out of it. Trevor came up to us and said, "Okay, you knuckleheads, I've gotten you passes, go in and learn something." But it was a statement that ours is a profession of learning from each other, of being around each other, of seeing what's happening, and like great athletes, advancing on it, trying to do the mile a little bit faster. And to the extent that I've played any role in that, it's on the backs of all of you. So thank you.
Oh, that's very, very kind words. And I'm actually super happy that you mentioned Canada. Unfortunately, one of our former chair people was able to join us briefly and then had to leave. Jeff came up through the ranks of the Canada chapter, but it's a good segue to another big area that I think characterizes the experience of an increasing number of our members, which is this issue of the IAPP being headquartered in the United States. There's a lot of American figures, including on this call, that have been leaders of the organization. And there's been a significant amount of growth outside the United States. And Boyana, I would love to open the door to hearing, your reflections on that change as well, because it's certainly something I've been personally very focused on as somebody who's based in Hong Kong. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this whole international flavor of the IAPP over time.
Thank you, Justin. And you all know I used to joke a lot about the fact that I was the I in the IAPP, because it's true. When I came on board to the board, it was 2008, I think, 2009. It was, the organization was perceived very much as a US focused, but Trevor had bigger ambition, and I think he was totally right. Yes, I was maybe a token first European on the board and first international non-US person, but look where we've come now. So I can't think of another profession or area of law which is as global in its nature that as privacy. And there is something special about the international aspect of people who we meet as well. They're all drawn to this privacy for the same reasons. It's a little bit like doing postgraduate or being in a sort of like-minded people, at some kind of meeting or conference. There is really a special camaraderie about this international group of people who all feel the same, yet they all come from very different backgrounds and very culturally view privacy very differently as well. So in today's world, although globalization is not very fashionable, and in this post-COVID world, in fact, we will have deglobalization, I think we are just going to see more of globalization of our privacy profession. Data is flowing and will be flowing. Solutions to privacy will be flowing, technology, best practices as well. The laws are converging as well. And to Peter's point, it was the US who invented Chief Privacy Officer, not the GDPR, right? But hey, now we all have data privacy officers and chief privacy officers. So I kind of think that with technology being global and digitalization still coming on, accelerating after COVID, we are going to see even bigger explosion of international in the IAPP. And in those days, of course, it was Europe, but today it's Latin America. That's where things are moving. Everybody's now interested in Brazilian data protection law, in the changes in Argentina. There's this new army of privacy enthusiasts and privacy officers coming from there. But the same with India and Asia as well. Justin, I know you're in Asia, and it is exciting to be there because some of the best solutions potentially for the accountable AI or machine learning may be coming from some research and development labs in China or Asia, as well as perhaps US and Europe. So we really need to keep focusing on growing this profession and really learning from each other as much as possible. I wanted to kind of remind, you asked us to think about interesting point, that the world really is very flat when it comes to privacy. So when I was hoping, in my job at that time, I was heading privacy at Accenture, I was hoping to look for pay rise, right? And I knew that, in fact, there were some amazing leaders out there like Harriet Pearson, Nola O'Connor, and I knew that they were sort of earning more than I did. So I reached out to them, right? Out across the Atlantic, because of course salaries were bigger in the US. We knew that, but there was no survey data, but we knew that was the case. And I said to them, look, I need to do something about my own salary, my own position in the company. What can I do? What kind of benchmark can you provide me? And they provided that. And isn't that amazing? That sort of camaraderie, that sharing of information, very personal as well, to help me actually get ahead in my own role. And I think and this was done across the Atlantic, across the borders. And I really hope today's privacy officers that are emerging in Asia, Latin America, in Africa, I hope they reach out to all of us. And I hope we also reach out to them, because they're going to be finding new ways in which they're going to be delivering this accountability, this new compliance, much different than perhaps ours were. So I kind of love that cultural diversity about IAPPs, and I really do hope that grows as well. And my last point of a kind of leadership lesson that I have learned through IAPP, when I was approached for the board position, it was a really busy time in my life. personally at home, I had 3 children. I was just promoted in a senior role at Accenture, and I had a lot on. And Nuala and Trevor came and said, you know, we'd love to have you on the board. And, you know, next year you're going to be, could you be the vice chair? Because next year you could become the chair. And I sort of said, no way, I cannot possibly take this on top of everything else that I have got. But hey, how wrong I was. And I said, no. And they said, no, but you must. I took that leap of faith saying, yeah, you know, I'm somehow going to manage another role on top of 15 others that I've had. And it was the most amazing time. And I'm telling you this story because I want to make sure that everybody who is listening to us realizes the potential that this international community of privacy people has got, you know, so much to give you, so much to help you with. So please never be shy to kind of take away the helping hand and the reaching hand. And if you look at some of the leaders that we have amongst us, you know, Joanne, you are one of the leaders who has transcended privacy, is now Chief Data Officer. We have got Keith Enright, who is sitting on a board as a privacy expert on a board of another company. So I think this is hugely exciting. And I really felt I needed to say a plug for our profession, because I think the skills that we have got and that cultural diversity and the ability to see beyond just our law, beyond just our country, beyond just our company, it is something special about the people who do privacy, and no matter where they are in the globe as well. So long may it continue.
Well said, Bojana, well said. That brings us actually very nicely to the present. And Kalinda, I'm turning to you because you and I happen to be right next to each other in terms of the sequence. We're lucky we still have you on the board. You are the outgoing former chairperson, and you lead our nominating committee for the coming year for the board of directors, and you've been a really important leader in the past several years cycle. On this point of diversity, I feel like that is a very important, it's not exclusively important now, it's always been important, but now it is something that is getting radically more attention than I think it did even in the past few years. And I wanted to hear your thoughts about that. You know, we're talking about it now as a board and as an organization, and the importance of diversity from lots of different perspectives. Bojana touched on diversity from an international and cultural perspective. Earlier, Sandy was talking about gender. What are your thoughts on the kinds of diversity topics we need to be tackling as a profession now?
Well, thanks so much for that, Justin. And I think one key part of diversity, as many of you who've watched this would have seen, is that of the mothers that I see in IAPP, and my daughter, who has continuously run back and forth throughout the call. One of the things that really drew me to this community in the early days was the fact that it was so diverse in reality. I think one of the things we often forget is that 20 years ago, outside of you know, maybe the healthcare and financial industries, there wasn't a lot of space for privacy, and there was a view of the fact that, like, we'll pass it off to whoever's willing to take it on. I was one of those rare birds who got interested in it in college, and so when the IAPP, when I learned about the IAPP, it was like Bojana said, like coming home. It was like graduate school. There's all these people who are actually talking about the same issues, and I think that sort of beginning for our community of a lot of people who were on the outskirts of things, were just trying to find this unique kind of carve out within the law where it balanced fairness and ethical issues and things that we all thought would eventually, as technology has developed to where we see it today, give people the ability to control their data and their lives. I think it brought about a very diverse group of people. And I think that is one of the benefits of our community is many of us are tied by this desire to do good, by this desire to see technology have a version of itself that allows for people to have freedom and protection, and for it not to be used in a bad way. And that brings together just a wonderful group of people from
globally, internationally. I think I feel very special being the first East Indian to be on the board. I think the fact that we have so many women as well in this profession is something that made me feel, quite honestly, 20 years ago, like I could be somebody in this profession and rise up in it. So I look to all the faces on this call and just think, I can't believe I'm even amongst all of you, because I remember my first IAPP conference in 2006, going and seeing many of you and thinking that, oh, if I could get them to talk to me, how exciting. So I feel very special to be on this call and to be able to say what a wonderful profession we have that allows you to focus on values and ethics, and still be a woman who can succeed and not feel there's any limits on it, as well as a mom, quite honestly. I sit here in my kids' playroom, and I think similar to Boyana, when I was first approached about the board by Hillary, one of my concerns was I had a newborn daughter, and how would I manage it? And now she's 5 and running through my calls, and I'm so glad I took it on and that I've had the opportunity to do this.
Thanks for that, Kalinda. And it's also a reminder, I think, you know, as we close out the hour that we had together, which is really unique, and I'm excited that the IAPP was able to make it happen, even if we have to do this in a virtual environment. It's the 20th anniversary of an organization, and I think, as we've seen, even in talking to one another, it's a mature enough profession that we actually have generations now, where you can see new people entering that, you know, maybe never worked with or met some of the really, really senior leaders that came before them. I remember job applications, you know, or even posting jobs that people could apply for, and you would ask for somebody that had 10 years of privacy experience. And that was a silly thing to ask for, because there were so few, you could count them on one hand back in the day. And now that kind of maturity is actually becoming possible in the recruitment cycle. And so I think this idea of generations after 20 years of experience and many more years ahead of us is an exciting one. And it's one that's inclusive, where instead of being an exclusive club of insiders who talk to themselves, the IAPP, and one of the things that I love about it is that it's expanding in its inclusiveness of technologists, of lawyers, of auditors, of accountants, of new workforce members, of job transitioners. It's just, it's a path that so many people can follow. And for the people that took the time to watch this video and listen to, in particular, some of the village elders that are here to help, professional village elders, I think it's an exciting time for a lot of people, and I hope everyone enjoyed hearing people's stories and anecdotes. And I want to thank you again on behalf of Trevor and the IAPP and all of the membership for the time that you took to join us today. And
Justin?
Yes.
Just quickly before we end, can we just have a toast to the IAPP as well as Trevor? I think we've heard so many times from each of us talking about Trevor's leadership. I was jotting down forward-looking, bigger ambition, entrepreneurial. I think we're also here today from a lot of the work that Trevor did as a leader. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.
Congratulations, Trevor.